The leather-clad biker was already halfway through calling the older man every name in the book when Bob Wilson calmly set down his coffee cup at the truck stop counter. The massive Harley rider, tattoos covering both arms, had been loud and obnoxious since walking into May's diner. But now he was focused entirely on the quiet man in the simple khaki shirt. "You look like you never served a day in your life, old man," the biker sneered, stepping closer to where Bob sat. "Probably one of those fake veterans trying to get discounts everywhere you go." Bob's weathered hands remained steady on his coffee cup, his posture straight and controlled despite being outnumbered by the biker's two companions who had positioned themselves nearby. The other patrons in the diner had gone silent, watching the confrontation unfold. May herself had stopped serving, her eyes darting between the aggressive stranger and Bob, whom she had known as a regular customer for years. Bob's gray hair was military neat, his bearing unmistakably disciplined even in civilian clothes. Bob turned slowly on his stool, his calm brown eyes meeting the biker's hostile glare without flinching. His movements were deliberate, measured, like a man accustomed to command. The biker lay sprawled on the diner floor, blood trickling from his split lip, his two front teeth scattered across the linoleum like broken dice. His companions stood frozen, staring not at their fallen friend, but the 4 silver stars gleaming on the collar insignia that had been hidden beneath Bob's jacket until now. May dropped her coffee pot, the ceramic shattering as recognition dawned across her weathered face. "General Robert Wilson," she whispered, her voice carrying the reverence of someone who had just realized she had been serving coffee to living legend. The other patrons began murmuring among themselves, cell phones emerging as words spread through the small crowd. The remaining bikers backed toward the door, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. One of them helped their leader to his feet, the man's swagger replaced by the unsteady movements of someone whose world had just been turned upside down. Blood continued to drip from his mouth as he struggled to process what had happened. Bob straightened his jacket, the 4 stars catching the fluorescent light. His bearing had shifted subtly but unmistakably, the quiet authority he had always carried now fully visible to everyone present. The transformation was complete. The roar of motorcycle engines outside May's diner announced the arrival of reinforcements before anyone could see them through the windows. 8 more bikers dismounted their Harleys, their leather cuts bearing the distinctive patches of the Devil's Riders Motorcycle Club. The biker Bob had floored was wiping blood from his mouth as his friends helped him outside to meet the newcomers. General Wilson remained seated at the counter, calmly finishing his coffee while May nervously refilled his cup. Through the window, he watched the growing crowd of angry bikers gesturing toward the diner. Their leader, a massive man with a gray beard and arms like tree trunks, was clearly being briefed on what had transpired inside. Several patrons had already slipped out the back exit, but a few regulars remained, including old Pete Henderson, who had served under Wilson in Desert Storm 20 years earlier. Pete recognized the tactical situation developing and quietly moved closer to the general's position. The lead biker approached the diner's front door, his heavy boots echoing on the wooden steps. Wilson set down his coffee cup with the same deliberate precision he had shown earlier, his eyes tracking the movement outside, while his mind automatically began assessing threats and calculating responses with the instincts of a career military officer. The club president pushed through the diner door, his massive frame filling the entrance as 8 bikers crowded behind him. Tank Morrison had earned his nickname through decades of bar fights and intimidation, but something in General Wilson's steady gaze made him hesitate for just a moment before approaching the counter. "Old man, you made a big mistake putting your hands on one of my boys," Tank growled, his voice carrying the menace of someone accustomed to getting his way through fear. Wilson turned slowly on his stool, his movements controlled and deliberate, studying the threat assessment before him with the cold calculation of a professional warrior. May had retreated behind the register, her hands shaking as she watched the confrontation escalate. Pete Henderson remained in his corner booth, ready to assist if needed, while the other remaining patrons pressed themselves against the far wall. The tension in the small diner was thick enough to cut with a knife. Wilson stood up from his stool, his full height matching Tank's despite being 20 years older. The general's bearing commanded attention, even without the visible rank insignia, his presence filling the room with an authority that transcended physical intimidation. This was about to become a very different kind of fight than Tank expected. Tank swung his meaty fist in a wide arc that would have flattened most men, but Wilson moved like liquid lightning, deflecting the blow and countering with a precise strike to the biker's solar plexus that dropped him to his knees, gasping for air. The other bikers surged forward, but the general was already in motion, his decades of combat training taking over. The first attacker caught Wilson's elbow in his throat and went down choking. The second received a knee to the ribs that sent him crashing into a table. Wilson moved through them like a surgeon with a scalpel, each movement economical and devastatingly effective. These weren't the clumsy, brawling techniques of bar fighters, but the refined skills of a man trained in lethal combat. May watched in stunned silence as the legendary four-star general dismantled 8 motorcycle club members with the methodical precision of a master craftsman. Pete Henderson had seen Wilson in action before, but even he was impressed by how sharp the general remained after years behind a desk. Within 90 seconds, every biker lay groaning on the diner floor except Tank, who remained on his knees, staring up at Wilson with newfound respect and no small amount of fear. The general hadn't even broken a sweat. The distant sound of sirens grew louder as 3 squad cars pulled into May's parking lot, their red and blue lights painting the diner windows in alternating colors. Sheriff Tom Bradley stepped out of the lead vehicle, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon when he saw the motorcycles and heard the groaning from inside the building. General Wilson calmly straightened his jacket and walked to the door to meet the law enforcement officers. "Sheriff Bradley," Wilson said in greeting, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command authority. The sheriff's eyes widened as he recognized both the man and the 4 stars on his collar, his defensive posture immediately shifting to one of professional respect. "Sir, what's the situation here?" Bradley asked, glancing past Wilson at the carnage inside the diner. 8 bikers in various states of consciousness littered the floor, while Tank Morrison remained kneeling, blood trickling from his nose. May stood behind her counter with a dish rag, methodically wiping down surfaces as if nothing unusual had happened. Wilson gave a concise, tactical briefing, explaining the initial confrontation and subsequent escalation with military precision. The sheriff nodded, taking notes while his deputies began securing the scene and checking on the injured bikers who were slowly regaining their composure. Tank Morrison struggled to his feet, wiping blood from his split lip as he faced General Wilson with a mixture of pain and grudging admiration. "I never fought anyone who moved like that," he admitted, his earlier arrogance replaced by the respect one warrior shows another. "My boys and I, we thought we were tough, but you just schooled us all without breaking a sweat." Wilson studied the biker leader's face, recognizing the shift from hostile aggression to genuine acknowledgement. Tank's leather vest bore patches indicating military service, including a faded Marine Corps emblem that explained his ability to recognize superior combat skills when he encountered them. Sheriff Bradley finished taking statements from the witnesses, all of whom corroborated that the bikers had initiated both confrontations. May testified that General Wilson had acted purely in self-defense, while Pete Henderson provided detailed observations of the tactical precision with which Wilson had neutralized multiple attackers without causing permanent injury. The paramedics arrived to check the injured bikers, finding mostly bruises and minor cuts despite the spectacular nature of their defeat. Wilson's surgical precision had been designed to incapacitate without causing lasting damage, demonstrating not just his combat skills, but his professional restraint and judgment under pressure. Word of the confrontation spread through the small town like wildfire, with cell phone videos already appearing on social media showing the aftermath of General Wilson's decisive victory. The local news van arrived within an hour, followed by military personnel from the nearby base who had heard reports that a 4-star general was involved in an incident at May's Diner. Colonel Sarah Martinez stepped through the door in full dress uniform, her aide close behind carrying a briefcase. "General Wilson," she said with crisp military bearing, rendering a perfect salute that Wilson returned with equal precision. The contrast between the formal military protocol and the chaotic scene of groaning bikers created a surreal atmosphere in the small roadside establishment. May watched in amazement as more military vehicles arrived outside, their occupants forming an impromptu honor guard in the parking lot. She had served coffee to Bob Wilson for 3 years without knowing she was pouring for one of the most decorated generals in military history, a man whose tactical brilliance had shaped modern warfare doctrine. The remaining bikers, now fully recovered and properly chastened, began filing out quietly under Sheriff Bradley's supervision. Tank Morrison paused at the door, nodding respectfully to Wilson before leading his crew to their motorcycles, the lesson in humility permanently etched in their memories. Colonel Martinez briefed General Wilson on the developing situation as more military vehicles continued arriving at the small truck stop. "Sir, the base commander requests your presence for an emergency briefing regarding the terrorist threat that emerged 3 hours ago," she reported, her voice carrying the urgency of someone delivering critical intelligence. Wilson nodded, his demeanor shifting seamlessly from retired general enjoying coffee to active military commander assessing a developing crisis. "The timing was no coincidence," Martinez explained. "Intelligence had intercepted communications about a planned attack on a nearby military installation, and Wilson's tactical expertise was desperately needed to coordinate the defensive response." May overheard fragments of the conversation and realized that what had started as a simple confrontation with disrespectful bikers had revealed the presence of exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. The legendary general had been drinking coffee in her diner just as his country needed him most, his combat readiness freshly demonstrated to everyone present. Pete Henderson approached Wilson before he departed, extending his hand with the solemn respect one veteran shows another. "General, it was an honor serving under you in Desert Storm, and an even greater honor witnessing you in action today," he said, his voice thick with emotion and pride. General Wilson climbed into the lead military vehicle, his transformation from quiet coffee drinker to active commander now complete in the eyes of everyone who had witnessed the extraordinary morning. The convoy of Humvees and support vehicles formed up with military precision, their destination the base, where Wilson's strategic expertise would prove crucial in thwarting the terrorist plot. May stood in her doorway, watching the convoy disappear down the highway, still processing the revelation that her regular customer was one of the most legendary military leaders in American history. The broken coffee cup on her floor seemed insignificant compared to the realization that she had just witnessed living history in action. Sheriff Bradley finished his incident report, noting that all charges against General Wilson had been dropped due to clear self-defense, while the bikers faced multiple charges for assault and disturbing the peace. The video footage captured by other patrons would serve as evidence, but more importantly, it would preserve the moment when a 4-star general reminded everyone that rank means nothing without the character and capability to back it up. Tank Morrison and his crew rode away in silence, each man contemplating the lesson they had learned about respect, humility, and the dangerous assumption that quiet dignity equals weakness or vulnerability. 3 weeks later, May's Diner had become a pilgrimage site for military personnel and civilians alike, all hoping to sit where General Robert Wilson had demonstrated that heroism never truly retires. The news coverage of his successful coordination of the base's defense against the terrorist threat had elevated him from local legend to national symbol of quiet strength and unwavering service. May had framed the broken coffee cup pieces and hung them behind the counter with a small plaque reading, "Never judge a book by its cover." She served coffee to visitors from across the country, each wanting to hear the story firsthand from someone who had witnessed the legendary general in action during what would become known as the May's Diner incident. Tank Morrison returned alone one afternoon, not for confrontation, but to apologize properly and leave a substantial tip for May's trouble. The biker had spent weeks reflecting on his encounter with true leadership and wanted to make amends for his crew's behavior. He ordered coffee and sat quietly at the same counter where Wilson had remained calm under pressure. General Wilson still stopped by occasionally during his travels, always ordering the same black coffee and sitting in the same spot. He never spoke about that morning, but his presence reminded everyone that real heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized until the moment demands their unique combination of courage, skill, and unshakable character. Have you ever witnessed someone underestimate the wrong person? Share your story about when quiet strength surprised everyone in the comments. The biker stepped closer, his breath reeking of whiskey and cigarettes as he leaned into Bob's personal space. "I bet you never even held a rifle, old man," he sneered, his voice rising to ensure everyone in the diner could hear his taunts. "Probably got your military stories from watching movies while real men like us were out here living free." Bob remained motionless on his stool, his coffee growing cold as he studied the aggressive stranger with the calm assessment of a professional warrior. The biker's companions had moved to flank him, clearly expecting their leader to intimidate the quiet older man into submission or flight. "You gonna say something, Grandpa, or just sit there like the coward you are?" the biker demanded, reaching out to shove Bob's shoulder. That was his mistake. Wilson moved with lightning precision, catching the biker's wrist and delivering a devastating right cross that dropped the man like a sack of grain, his body hitting the floor with a wet thud. As the biker lay unconscious, Bob calmly adjusted his jacket, revealing the 4 silver stars on his collar that had been hidden beneath the fabric. The transformation was instant and absolute, as every person in May's diner suddenly realized they had just witnessed a 4-star general defend himself against a fool who had picked the wrong target.